Senator, ambassadors, distinguished participants, good morning. Thank you for being here with us today. And I was reflecting walking in here this morning that I think it is appropriate that we assemble in the Ronald Reagan building because due to his efforts, which produced the end of the Cold War, we have been able in the last 20 or 30 years to witness constructive cooperation and enhancing dialogue and various projects and activities, as well as scientific discoveries throughout the Arctic. If the Cold War was still with us, we wouldn't be here today in the spirit and with the program that we have decided to follow. It is perhaps also worth reflecting here this morning that the Arctic was for centuries completely unknown to the enlightened, knowledgeable part of the Western world. It had been inhabited by the indigenous people for centuries without really any awareness in the capitals of power or in the learned institutes of science and research. That's why when the first discoverers in the beginning of the 20th century started their journeys into the Arctic, they became world famous and drew extensive crowds in New York and different parts of the United States because they were in fact the first representatives of the learned Western Enlightenment to venture into the Arctic. And then, of course, the Cold War, due to the military confrontation, especially between the United States and the Soviet Union, closed this territory again for most part of the second half of the 20th century. So it wasn't really until the Cold War ended following the summit of President Reagan and Gorbachev in Iceland in 1986 that the states of the Arctic, as well as other members of the global community, were able to come together in constructing a new system of cooperation and dialogue in this important part of the world. And the Arctic is indeed a very important part of the world. I often emphasize that perhaps the concept the Arctic is misleading in the global context because in reality we are talking about a big part of the planet, ranging from Alaska over the huge Canadian territories onwards to Greenland, which is half the size of Western Europe, across the northern part of the North Atlantic to Iceland and the northern part of the Nordic countries into the Arctic Oceans, and across 7 time zones in the northern part of Russia. In fact, it is a part of the planet almost the size of Africa. And we are only in the beginning of the first decades of mapping out how we conduct ourselves in this important part of the planet. And its importance, of course, is especially enhanced because of the evolution of climate change and the melting of the ice and the glaciers in recent years and times, as well as the discovery of various resources of great importance for the 21st century economies. That is why countries like China, Japan, Korea, Singapore, as well as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom and others are now active participants in the evolution of the Arctic. So what was 100 years ago a remote and unknown part of the world has now in fact become a global playing field. And if one doubted that, you should have joined me a few weeks ago in Dalian in China for the Nordic-China Arctic Dialogue, where the representatives of the Ocean Administration of China and the leadership of Dalian and the big shipping company COSCO presented the decision by the Chinese authorities that Dalian would serve as the Arctic port of China. The mere fact that China has now a formal Arctic port, and the Dalian Maritime University has an extensive program to study and do research on Arctic shipping, should be a wake-up call for us all. We will also here, during this forum, listen to the Arctic ambassador of Korea, of the very enlightened and impressive program that Korea is engaged in the Arctic. And it might also be of great relevance to the American leadership that such a formidable gathering of bilateral allies of the United States, both in Asia and Europe, Japan, Korea, Singapore, France, Germany, United Kingdom, are all now considerable, strong Arctic partners. And this can be witnessed every year at the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland, which, as was mentioned, I was privileged to launch together with my American friends, Alice Rokoff and others, just 4 years ago. It's not a long time, 4 years. But during that time, we have seen the assemblies in Iceland in October every year grow to 2,000 participants from more than 50 countries. It is an extraordinary demonstration of the global importance of the Arctic, because however good we are at organizing things, Alice and I and a few others, we couldn't bring together every year 2,000 people to Iceland from more than 50 countries, including leaders like the former President of France, the Prime Minister of Scotland, the Secretary General of the United Nations, formal representation and delegations from President Xi Jinping of China and Chancellor Merkel of Germany, if there was not a monumental transformation taking place. And this is why, of course, the future role of the United States and Russia in the Arctic is so important. Not just for the Arctic, but also for the entire world. Not just for the United States or Russia, but also for the entire world. And that is the reason why, together with the Wilson Center, the Arctic Circle has organized this forum here today and tomorrow in the Wilson headquarters of the Wilson Center and in the Ronald Reagan building, in order to further the dialogue on the future of the Arctic and the future role of the United States and Russia, especially now after the United States has concluded a very successful chairmanship of the Arctic Council. A chairmanship which was made successful, among other things, by the constructive cooperation from Russia during that period. And in this, let me call it a circus of stories and media discussions and television shows and investigations and whatever you want to call it about Russia and the United States, it's very important not to lose sight of the fact that in the last 2 years, these important countries have demonstrated to the world that they can have a very constructive, productive relationship with regard to one of the most important parts of the planet. And when Secretary Tillerson celebrated that success, when he handed over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council to Finland, we all thanked the United States for its constructive leadership, including our Russian friends. So perhaps here today in the Ronald Reagan building, we are also adding an important dimension to a dialogue in this town and in this country about the future of our relationships and our efforts. This forum is the 5th in the series of separate forums, specialized in nature, which the Arctic Circle has initiated in the last 2 years. The first one was in Alaska in August of 2015 on ports and shipping. The second one was in Singapore in the November of that year on the view of the Asian countries towards the Arctic. The third one was in Greenland in May of last year. It turned out to be the largest international gathering ever to take place in the history of Greenland. The fourth one was in Quebec last December on regional development in the Arctic, and now the fifth one is here in the Ronald Reagan building on the United States and Russia in the Arctic. And the next one we have just agreed on a few weeks ago will be in Scotland, hosted by Nicola Sturgeon and the government of Scotland under the important title Scotland and the New North. will be a pioneering effort for the government of Scotland to look north of Scotland instead of focusing all their attention on the relationship with London. So let me conclude here this morning by thanking all of you for being here today, by thanking the Wilson Center especially for this fascinating cooperation, which I hope will be a beginning of a long and productive relationship between the Arctic Circle and the Wilson Center. And it's very important for the United States and for this town to have the Wilson Center engaged as a platform for continuous dialogue on the Arctic now when the US has handed over the chairmanship to other countries. And in addition to thanking the Secretariat of the Arctic Circle, I also especially want to thank Mike Fraga for his extraordinary work in bringing this together in such a short time. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Harman to you. I know I don't really need to introduce her. She has sometime used the opportunity when introducing me and Alice to make some characteristic descriptions of us being natural forces like hurricanes or other natural phenomena on the political scene. But Jane is a planet. She is a special part of the universe. And it's a great privilege for us to have her joining the Arctic family, and for us in the Arctic Circle to have her as a friend, as a partner. Jane, please.